Ferrari's tire problem was not just exposed in Austria. It may have exposed the entire car. Because when Hamilton and Leclerc needed race pace, Ferrari's tires started telling the truth. The red car could look sharp in qualifying, could start near the front, could make fans believe the comeback was real, but when the Grand Prix became hot, dirty, and brutal, the tires began to fall away, and with them went strategy, confidence, attack power, and control. That is huge news because tires are not one detail in Formula One. They are everything. If Ferrari cannot protect them, Hamilton cannot use his race intelligence. Leclerc cannot turn one-lap magic into Sunday results. Vasseur cannot build strategy from strength. And Mercedes and Red Bull now know exactly where to apply pressure. So the real question is not whether Ferrari has speed. The real question is far more dangerous. Can Ferrari stop its own tires from destroying Hamilton and Leclerc's race before their rivals even need to? Subscribe to the channel. At first, Austria looked like the kind of weekend Ferrari needed to prove the story was finally changing. Not with words, with tire life. Because after Hamilton's victory in Spain, the emotional weight around Ferrari shifted. The team suddenly had proof that the car could win when the conditions were right. The fans had a reason to believe again. Hamilton's move to Ferrari felt less like a romantic gamble and more like the beginning of something dangerous. And Leclerc, standing right in the middle of that story, had another chance to show that Ferrari's future was not only about one driver's arrival. It was about two elite drivers finally having a car that could fight. That is what made Austria so important. Ferrari did not arrive at the Red Bull Ring looking hopeless. They arrived with momentum, confidence, and enough qualifying performance to make the front of the grid nervous. Leclerc was near the front. Hamilton was close as well. Two Ferraris in position. Two drivers capable of punishing any mistake. A race that, on paper, could have become a serious Ferrari attack. But Formula One does not reward paper. It rewards tires. And Austria was ready to ask Ferrari the most uncomfortable question of all. Can your car keep its tires alive when a race gets ugly? The Red Bull Ring may look simple, but that simplicity is exactly why it is so dangerous. The lap is short. The straights are long. The braking zones are heavy. The exits punish the rear tires every time the driver gets back on the throttle. Again and again and again. There's no long escape from the stress. The car is constantly being asked to brake, rotate, accelerate, and survive. If the tires are healthy, the lap feels sharp. If the tires begin to overheat, the whole race starts to shrink around the driver. That was the first danger for Ferrari, because the warning signs had already been there. Leclerc had pointed toward a straight-line weakness. Ferrari was losing too much time on the straights, and in Austria, that is more than a small issue. The straights are where a car attacks, where it defends, where it puts pressure on the car ahead, where it escapes the car behind. If Ferrari is weak there, Hamilton and Leclerc have to work harder somewhere else. And somewhere else usually means the corners. But Ferrari was also surprised by its corner performance. That is where the problem becomes more serious. Because if a car loses time on the straights, the driver needs the corners to give something back. If the corners do not give enough back, the driver starts forcing the lap time. He asks more from the front tires. He asks more from the rear tires. He pushes harder on entry, harder on exit, harder through traction zones. And the tires pay the price. That is the chain Austria began to expose. Straight-line weakness creates pressure. Corner discomfort removes the escape route. The driver pushes harder. The tires overheat. The grip fades. The race pace disappears. And suddenly, Ferrari is not attacking Mercedes or Red Bull. Ferrari is trying to stop its own tires from collapsing. That is why this was huge news for Hamilton and Leclerc. Because tire degradation is not just an engineering topic. It decides how much freedom a driver has. It decides whether Hamilton can use his race intelligence as a weapon or whether he has to use it as damage control. It decides whether Leclerc can turn qualifying brilliance into a real result or whether Sunday slowly takes the reward away from him. Without tire life, everything becomes smaller. The strategy becomes smaller. The attacking window becomes smaller. The driver's confidence becomes smaller. Even the team's imagination becomes smaller because the pit wall cannot build bold plans around tires that may not survive the demand. And that is the painful truth Ferrari faced. They had the drivers. They had the emotion. They had the momentum. They had enough one-lap pace to make the weekend feel alive. But Austria was never going to be decided by one lap. It was going to be decided by repeatable pace, by tire control, by whether the red cars could keep grip underneath them long enough to fight when the race moved into its most important phase. That is where the weekend began to turn. Because in qualifying, the car can be protected. The driver gets clean air. The tires only need to survive one attack. The lap is short, sharp, and focused. A brilliant driver can cover a weakness with commitment. Leclerc can do that. Hamilton can do that. But a Grand Prix is different. A Grand Prix does not ask for one perfect answer. It asks the same question for lap after lap. Can you still push? Can you still defend? Can you still follow? Can you still attack without destroying the next 5 laps? That is the real test Ferrari failed in Austria. And once that test starts going wrong, the driver feels it before anyone else fully understands it. Hamilton feels the rear tire slipping a little sooner than expected. Leclerc feels the car refusing to rotate as cleanly as it did before. The throttle becomes more delicate. The braking zones become more cautious. The exits stop feeling like launch points and start feeling like traps. T does not always create one dramatic moment. It slowly reduces the options. The driver cannot stay close for as long. The attack window gets shorter. The defensive margin becomes weaker. The pit wall has to think less about winning the race and more about preventing the stint from falling apart. That is the hidden damage. Ferrari's tires do not only cost lap time, they cost control. And control is everything at the front of Formula One. Mercedes had it in Austria. Russell could shape the race from the front. Antonelli's podium strengthened the feeling that Mercedes had a package that could stay alive across the full Grand Prix. The car looked more composed. The strategy looked more stable. The tires looked less like a crisis that needed constant rescue. Ferrari, meanwhile, looked like a team trying to balance too many problems at once. Straight line weakness, corner discomfort, tire wear, heat, dirty air, race pace that did not match the promise of qualifying. Put those together, and the drivers are no longer racing with freedom. They are racing inside limits. And that is what makes this so important for Hamilton and Leclerc, because both of them need a car that allows commitment. Hamilton needs to know that if he saves early, the car will reward him later. Leclerc needs to know that if he qualifies near the front, the tires will not punish him for fighting. Both drivers need to believe that Ferrari's strategy is built on strength, not on fear of collapse. Austria damaged that belief. Not permanently, but enough to make the next races feel more suspicious. Because once a driver has felt a tire meltdown like that, it changes how he interprets the car. A strong practice run is no longer just a strong practice run. He asks how the tires will behave after more laps. A good qualifying result is no longer pure relief. He asks whether the race pace will support it. A strategy call is no longer only about timing. He asks whether the tire life will be there when the plan needs it. That is how doubt enters a team. It does not arrive all at once. It arrives through repeated questions. Will the rear tires hold? Can we follow another car? Can we attack without paying later? Can we defend without overheating the rubber? Can the car stay in its window when the track gets hotter? Can Ferrari stop Sunday from undoing everything Saturday created? Those questions are now attached to Ferrari after Austria, and rivals will know it. Mercedes will not simply look at the result and move on. They will study when Ferrari's tires began to fade. They will study how much pressure the red cars could apply before falling back. They will study whether Hamilton and Leclerc had to back away after following. They will study whether Ferrari's pace was strong only in clean air or whether it could survive traffic and heat. Red Bull will study it too, because in Formula One, tire weakness is not just something a team suffers. It is something opponents can attack. Make Ferrari defend early. Make Ferrari use its rear tires out of traction zones. Make Hamilton and Leclerc sit in dirty air. Make them chase instead of control. Force them to choose between staying close now and having tire life later. That is how a rival turns Ferrari's problem into a weapon. And that is the nightmare Vasseur has to prevent. Because if the Austrian tire meltdown becomes a known pattern, then Ferrari's entire race approach changes. The team may have to build more conservative strategies. It may have to protect tires earlier. It may have to sacrifice qualifying sharpness for race balance. It may have to accept compromises in cooling, setup, and aerodynamic efficiency just to keep the tires alive. None of those choices are easy. Every solution costs something. If Ferrari protects the tires more, it may lose peak pace. If Ferrari chases peak pace, it may keep hurting the tires. If Ferrari opens the car for more cooling, it may lose straight-line efficiency. If Ferrari trims the car for speed, it may make the tires work harder in corners. That is why this problem is so difficult. It is not a single button. is a whole operating window. Ferrari needs to find a version of the car that lets Hamilton and Leclerc push without destroying the race. It needs the tires to stay alive when the car is heavy with fuel. It needs enough stability in dirty air. It needs enough straight-line speed that the drivers do not have to overwork the corners to recover time. And most importantly, it needs repeatable race pace. Not one lap, not one stint that looks good for a moment. Repeatable pace, because championships are not built on moments that flash and disappear. They are built on performance that survives pressure. Austria's suggested Ferrari still has work to do there, and that is why the tire meltdown was such huge news for both drivers. For Hamilton, it raises the question of whether Ferrari can give him the kind of race platform he needs. Not just a car that can win when everything is perfect, but a car that can let him use his experience when the race becomes complicated. For Leclerc, it raises the question of whether his Saturday brilliance can finally be protected on Sunday. Because there's nothing more frustrating than putting the car near the front, only to watch the tires turn that position into pressure instead of opportunity. Both drivers are asking for the same thing in different ways. Give us a car that holds on. That is the heart of the Ferrari problem. Because once the tires fade, everything else begins to look worse. The straight line weakness feels bigger because the driver cannot get close enough to attack. The corner weakness feels bigger because the car has less grip to recover time. The strategy feels weaker because the pit wall is reacting. The driver confidence feels weaker because every push lap carries a price. Tires are the first domino. Austria showed what happens when that domino falls. And now Ferrari has to stop it from falling again.